Good afternoon and welcome to the Security Watch India Conference, December 9th, 2009, being hosted at the Hotel Lalit, New Delhi. And with me, I have the pleasure of welcoming to this interview Ms. Elaine Dezenski. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you very much.
Elaine, we'd like to know, given the fact that you have worked with the Interpol, where you have also worked on this very different or innovative project, where you brought in special new ideas or thinking out of the box, as it were. Can you tell us something more about it? How come Interpol, the old lady of the police forces around the world, or the grand old mom of police forces, actually thinking out of the box?
Yeah. Well, it's true that you don't always think about Interpol as being on the cutting edge. It's more of a traditional, or has been a very traditional law enforcement agency. But I think that the organization has recognized that if it wants to be relevant in the future, it has to make changes now to bring in the private sector, to work more closely with different parts of governments to ensure that the tools and services that an international organization like Interpol can provide are actually meeting the needs of its member countries. For example, at Interpol we have 187 countries that were represented. This means that there's a huge diversity in terms of needs, understanding what the threat perceptions are, and the role of law enforcement writ large. So when the diversity is so great, it makes it even more important that you have a very strategic approach and that you think about what partners you can bring in to ensure that your mission is successful.
Some of the problems that India faces, for example, even Pakistan is a member of the Interpol. There is this theory that goes around that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, which is the position that the other country takes. Now, how does Interpol ensure that someone who's declared a criminal in the courts of one country, or there's a red corner notice for someone in one country, is actually extradited from the other country?
That's a very, very important question, and it gets to the constitution of the organization, which prohibits any action on the part of Interpol as it relates to political, military, religious, or racial activities. So it's not permitted for Interpol to act in a, for example, political capacity. We can only respond, or Interpol can only respond if a member country asks them to do it, but there's a very strict procedure to ensure that what it's being asked to take on doesn't violate its constitution.
Right. Elaine, every nation or every modern nation has a system, a law system, a legal system where you have the judiciary, the courts, and you have the police which enforces the law. Right. So these two are distinctly separate. And you have, say, the police, the law enforcers bring in the criminals and put them on trial, and it is only a qualified judge or a court of law that can pronounce a person guilty or not guilty. Right? Can the same thing be done on an international level? For example, can the International Court of Justice work with Interpol along the same lines, and can international criminals be brought to justice?
I think that's an area that deserves a lot more study and focus. Interpol does have some interaction with the International Criminal Court, but I can tell you that seeing how crime is spreading from a transnational perspective, oftentimes will bring up this issue of an international tribunal, for example, dealing with drug traffickers, human traffickers, those who are somehow infiltrating the cyber network, where there exists no way to effectively utilize one country's legal system, because oftentimes you're not sure exactly where the crime has started and where it ends. So these are the complications of the 21st century, and I would argue that the legal institutions probably need to be amended to be able to combat these crimes more effectively.
Elaine, you're working with the Civitas group right now, and Civitas is a well-known organization in the US, having many luminaries from the US departments of various government departments serving with them. What has been your experience with Civitas, and what is Civitas looking for dealing with in India?
Mm-hmm. Well, Civitas is the leading strategic consultancy around issues of homeland security. We're also very active in intelligence and national security. The business is split really between public sector and private sector. About 65% of our business coming from the public sector, or from the private sector. So that means we're in an advisory capacity on both sides of the equation, which is important. I think that we are typically looking for those projects that have impact, where we can provide that strategic counsel that capitalizes on lessons learned in the U.S., that takes advantage of our knowledge of the global marketplace as it relates to security. And then, of course, an interesting part of what we do is advise our partners at the Paladin Group, which is a venture capital fund, about investments in startups that are in the homeland security space. And that's important because as we have an eye towards the policy and the legislative framework coming around, it can oftentimes inform those companies that are poised to make a difference in the marketplace.